Welcome back to the first session, so we finally get to see some research. I'm the research director here at the ECB. My name is Luc Laeven, and we're going to talk about labor, which I think is actually the most important part of this whole AI discussion, not least because we all want to know whether we're still going to have a job 10 years from now. But I think more fundamentally here at the ECB, and I think most of us worry about what will AI do for productivity, labor productivity, and will we be paid for performance or luck going forward? Is AI going to be part of us or not? And in economist jargon, basically, we've for a long time treated human capital as something inalienable, separate from capital, but maybe the world will be a bit more complicated going forward. So who will own the AI part in human capital? There are lots of legal, ethical questions. Now, I don't think we get into those yet, but that's what preoccupies my mind. So we have two very interesting papers, and we will start with Christina. The floor is yours for 30 minutes or so.
Great, wonderful. So thanks for being here, and thanks for having me talk a little bit about the impacts of AI on the labor market. This is joint work with a former doctoral student, Felix Grimm, and also a postdoc, Erwin Winkler, who's at Nuremberg. So we already heard it in the introduction of President Lagarde that productivity and the labor market impacts are probably two of the currently most important dimensions. And if you read the newspapers, I think everybody has seen that there is both a fascination and fear of what AI might or might not do. We have just heard that it's a general purpose technology that is around, is developing fast, but is also taking a long time to kind of make it into the firms and the production technologies. So as we know from earlier technologies, that there was a lot of skill bias in terms of labor demand, but also in terms of wage inequality. And I think there are concerns, and rightly so, that we might have similar developments. So in the theory, getting back to the task-based model that already took some criticism, we can distinguish quite a few different channels how a new technology might actually affect labor markets. So the one that's, of course, mostly focused on is the worry about automation, and I will have a little bit to say about that. But there are many other channels that actually might or might not benefit labor in terms of productivity changes in some tasks or in complementary tasks, or even the augmentation mechanism that we might see new tasks and new jobs developing. So what I want to give you a little bit of an overview from one of Europe's largest labor markets in Germany, probably also one that it's on the digitalization frontier. It's not on the very frontier, to say the least, but nevertheless has already, we see some impacts of AI, and I want to give you some insights about how does AI shift job tasks, how do workers seem to adjust to AI using some administrative data, do we see any displacement effects or not, and to what extent is AI actually skill biased. So I will focus on the worker level because, well, there are some interesting aspects about that worker can, of course, use AI and also adjust potentially more easily to AI than maybe some of the firms. And I will also focus on what I call the first wave of AI, so pre-generative AI and more predictive AI. And the reason I give you is if we look at the jobs, the skills that employers in Europe, and this is for 4 European countries, what kind of digital skills they're looking for. You can probably don't read the individual categories, but it's going from very simple digital skills to very advanced digital skills. And you see on the very right-hand generative AI, this is from 2023. So you see generative AI is still a minuscule aspect of labor demand. So we are going to focus on the pre-generative AI world, also in terms of the data. Now, in terms of measurement, we started this project before the pandemic, And so there was hardly any measure of AI around, and we couldn't do much because of surveys. So we're going to use an approach that is popular from innovation economics to measure the advancement of AI in patents, and also do it for another technologies, robots, to kind of get some validation and robustness exercise. So the way we're going to do this is we're going to take, and I will just tell you very quickly because I do want to focus on actually the results we find. But what we're going to take the universe of patents that are registered at the European Patent Office, and this means, of course, not only by European inventors, but by any inventor who wants to protect their work innovation in Europe. So we have lots of innovators from the US, from China, from other Asian countries. We are going to use a keyword-based classification using NLPs to identify in the title or abstract some measure of AI that this patent is trying to protect. If you look at the type of patents, you might think, well, is that really capturing what we're using? But if you look at the type of patent that actually cover AI, you see a lot of the things that we talk about today: speech analysis, data processing, image recognition, even the hybrid cars are already there. So there's lots of things that actually nowadays are available in software, are already patented several years ago in some of these AI patents. Now, one of the challenges is, of course, that patent data comes with patent codes and doesn't tell us immediately what the industry of usage for that patent is. So in order to walk from the patent to the industry that might actually use that patent and the knowledge that's embodied in that patent, we're using a mapping. And what's really nice about that, it has been developed by innovation economists, and it's a very recent one that is continuously updated, which I think is especially important for a technology like AI. I don't really have time to give you all the details, but the basic way it works, and just to give you an idea how do we think about it, you basically take the description of an industry in terms of what they do, in terms of the production process and their products and services, and you see whether any of the patents that you have are actually relating to some of these description of what the industry does. You do that at a very detailed 4-digit level. And then you do some reweighting and adjustment, because of course some industries are very heavily innovative and some patents are spread across many different production processes to get a weight. And then what we do is we take our patents that we identify as AI patents and apply these weights in order to assign to an industry at a very detailed 4-digit level a weight how many patents of AI are actually related to the production process that this industry is using. So if you think about this, it's different from an occupational exposure measure, because here we're really looking at the production function of the industry. So this means that we can have lots of adjustments within the industry in the firms, changing the worker tasks. All of that is still within the same industry, so there can be lots of adjustment to this measure. Now, the final step is then to think about how do we take these patent data that we now have attributed to industries, how do we take that actually to the data? Now, the year-to-year patent information is not very useful, because that, of course, depends on how the patent office works, how quickly the process is. So we are going to take, again, borrowing from the innovation literature, an approach that takes actually the cumulative knowledge that is embodied in patents to the data. So we're going to take the sum of the patents starting in 1990 all the way to a period 2006, 2011, 2018, in order to see where, in which industries we see a change and an increase in the patenting activity that relates to the production process of that industry. And again, we do the same for robots to kind of also compare the two technologies, but also as a kind of robustness check. Now you might say, well, are we actually measuring something interesting? So here I show you 3 kind of validation exercises. So on the bottom, you see that our robot patents actually correlate okay with the IFR data on robot stocks. The problem here is that robot stocks are only available for very few industries, so that's why the graph doesn't look super nice. On the top left, we have an indicator that we actually generated from some big data on firm websites, where we work with the startup. And you see actually that what firms post on their website as using AI quite nicely correlates with our measure. On the top right side, you see the Felton occupational exposure measure aggregated up to the industry level also correlates. I have to say the correlation is stronger in manufacturing and is not so strong in some of the high-powered service sector like real estate and insurance, for example. Okay. So now the question is, okay, we have our measure in hand, and now we want to take this and understand how actually worker-level jobs are changing. So we're going to turn to a survey that has been repeated in Germany every 6 to 7 years. And this survey asks a worker sample about their jobs they do on, the tasks they do on their jobs. These are not super detailed tasks, and remember, this is a general representative survey of the workforce, so these categories of tasks are relatively broad. Nevertheless, we're going to look at these 17 tasks, but we will also aggregate them into 3 standard categories: the routine tasks, the abstract task, and the manual tasks. And we're going to look at the task share, but there we can also look at just the tasks, as the number of tasks you perform in a particular category relative to the total number, so whether your share of routine tasks in your job increases or not. We're going to mostly focus on the extensive margin, whether you perform the task. We can also look at the intensive margin a little bit. Results are actually not that different, so I'm not going to focus on that. And here I show you first, because I think it's quite telling, just a very simple correlation at the industry level. What you see here is for robots on the top left and the top bottom, the correlation we know from the previous literature. Robots seems to be negatively affecting routine tasks. That's the whole story about the routine bias technological change, and there seems to be a slight positive correlation with abstract tasks, also pushing to the story that robots seem to have created more jobs and complexify some of the work. What's interesting is that AI is exactly the opposite pattern. AI actually seems to decrease abstract tasks and seems to have a positive effect, or well, positively correlated, I should say, with routine tasks in the job. Now, this is very descriptive, so let's talk a little bit about, well, is that actually a pattern we see in the data at the worker level? So we're going to take this task data into a regression, where we look at the task share or the individual tasks, it doesn't really matter, on our 2 measures of technologies, AI and robots. We're going to include industry and occupation fixed effects to kind of look what's happening within occupations, within industries, but exploiting the detailed industry level variation for workers that have a similar age, gender, and other demographics. I should also say that there is no evidence of a feedback effect, that we don't see that the task structure of your job today has an impact on our measure, so that doesn't seem to be a problem. If we do that, we find a very similar picture. AI really seems to have a decline in abstract tasks and seems to increase routine tasks in your job. And what's interesting here is that we look both, if we don't include fixed effects, most of the change is within detailed occupations. So here we are looking at 3-digit occupations, and most of the change we see is within this 3-digit occupation. So what's happening in the tasks is really something that's a within occupation phenomenon. If you look at the particular tasks that are changing, what we see is that this task described as monitoring, operating technical processes in machine, that's going up, which seems to make sense if you have to work with algorithms. And it seems to reduce the amount or the number of people that work with gathering information and investigating and documenting. So now you might wonder, well, does that make sense? One interesting fact here is that when we look at this across our different survey waves, we see that the effect of AI, our measure, grows over time, as we would expect as AI becomes more prevalent in the workplace. So for both routine and for abstract tasks, the effect is quite mild in the 2006 wave because, well, there's probably not that much going on, and it keeps growing. We're waiting for the 2024 wave, and I'm pretty sure the effect will become even stronger. Now, your question about why does the routine task share go up? Didn't we learn in the past technological revolution that routine is out? Why would we see an increase in routine-based tasks? Well, what we do here is we take the 4 routine tasks in the category and look at this a little bit more closely. So we look at workers that are actually what we define as high-level routine tasks. So these are people who work either with a computer or tablet, have quite a lot of flexibility, autonomy at their work, and are also using abstract tasks quite prominently in their job. It doesn't matter how we define it, this high-level routine task, but what you see is that the routine task increase is not the sort of, let's say, stupid production floor repeating, you're putting your hammer on some piece of work. It's mostly the monitoring and operating of people who already work with a computer, a tablet. It's people who have quite a bit of autonomy at the workplace, and people who are also using abstract tasks. So it's really shifting a particular different level, I would say, of routine tasks than we have seen in previous technological revolutions. Now you might wonder, well, what about different types of workers? So here we are focusing, and again, I will explain to you the picture because it's probably too small. We are distinguishing between people with a college degree and people without a college degree. So you see the people without college degree on the left-hand side, and people with a college degree on the right-hand side. So what's the key message here? The first message is all skill groups are affected by AI. We see task changes for all groups. However, what's kind of interesting is that we see both a decline in the gathering information, investigating, and documenting. That's down here in the abstract task. That's true for both skill categories. And we see an increase in the monitoring and operating of processes, again, both for high-skilled and low-skilled. However, what's interesting is that the high-skilled, they actually substitute towards a different tasks. So their abstract tasks don't go down in net, because now they're doing more teaching, mentoring, and training. So the reason that we seem to see that high-skilled workers are less negatively affected in the task structure is not that AI is not affecting them, but it is because they can actually switch to another task. So they have some, whether it's complementarity or comparative advantage, that shields them from the negative impact of AI on their abstract tasks in the job. Low-skilled workers cannot do that. Or at least we don't see it in the data for now. Now the question is, well, if we take this data on the task changes in the workforce seriously, what is the implication of that for maybe worker careers? I mean, there has been lots of talk about the broad-scale automation of potential work, large-scale job losses, wage inequality will increase. The data we have looked at, the survey data, doesn't really allow us to get there. But what we are going to do is to take this to administrative data from Germany, going all the way to 2021, in order to shed some light on that. Because if the task changes I showed you, if this is mostly about automation, then we should expect some job losses. However, if this is purely a task shift within jobs, so before I do lots of information gathering, and now instead I just looked at the algorithm is actually working properly, then I might actually not see any displacement. However, I might see wage changes to the extent that the prices of different tasks might actually differ. I might also observe some productivity gains if I'm maybe now working with some predictive AI, and that increases my productivity, as we all hope as researchers, of course, that AI will do that. then we might actually see some wage gains. So in order to shed light on these questions, we are turning to the well-known administrative data, and in particular the worker biographies, where we observe day-to-day very detailed information about their job careers, their industry, their occupation, and also their wages. And again, we're going to look at 3 different sub-periods: a super early period in the early 2000s, the mid-2010s, and then the late 2010s, until 2021. So the interesting thing is, just like the previous literature, we don't find big employment effects. So this is actually a measure that is cumulated over 5 years, and we see a very small negative employment effect. However, what's interesting is that, again, it's not that only the low-skilled are affected. This is, again, both the university and the low-skilled are negatively affected, but the effects are very small, which is in line with what most of the literature has found. So now the question is, well, how can we square the evidence that we saw that tasks seems to be changing in the occupations to the effect that apparently we don't see large-scale displacement? So I have to show you one table, because I don't know how to really present it in a different way. What's interesting, the reason we don't see big negative employment effects is because most of the adjustment is through worker reallocation. So workers are now, with AI, more likely to change employers. And they're interestingly mostly leaving exposed industries towards industries that are very similar within the same 2-digit but a different 3-digit industry. So they seem to kind of leave the exposed industries, and they mostly go to industries that are less exposed to AI. We can't really tell whether these moves are all good or all bad. So if you look at the firm fixed effect of the firms they're going to, some seem to be actually improving their match, some seem to be going to a worse match, or a firm paying lower wage premiums. Overall, it's pretty balanced. But this is actually, and we don't see any impact on occupational mobility. So all what we see here is literally across industry moves, which is, I think, also kind of interesting, because many of the studies looking at technological change and workers are often looking at between occupation changes, both in the task but also in employment. And that's not, at least to our evidence, that's not doing the job. We need to really look within occupations. If you look at the wage effects, that is also kind of interesting. I should put them up with a little bit of a grain of salt. I think they are causal, but I wouldn't bet my life on it, let's say. So overall, what we do see is that we seem to see small negative wage effects. And these negative wage effects are actually mostly concentrated among the low-skilled. And what's interesting, if you split it up by movers, it looks like for the low-skilled, so people without a university degree, whether you leave the exposed industry or you stay, your wages are still declining. The effects, again, are not big, but they're there. For the high-skilled, it actually looks like, well, if you have to move, it's not so great, but what's actually good if you can stay. So if you stay in the exposed industry, you seem to have a positive wage effect. Now, is this selection, or could this be some evidence of potential productivity gains or specialization? After looking at the data a lot, looking at high tenure workers, trying to tease out that this is not driven a selection effect, so high tenure workers tend to change very little their jobs. I think it has to do something with that they're actually picking up a gain that's happening. But again, this is my take on the data. So what are the lessons here? I think the lessons are that already in this pre-generative AI has already started to change the task structure of work. It has, contrary to the previous technologies, especially robots, but also ICT investments, it has led to a decline in abstract work and an increase in routine work, and especially the kind of routine work what we call high level, so a quite complex task, but nevertheless quite routine. This is very different from the previous technology, so everybody who's trying to say, oh, it's robots, it's the same thing, don't believe it, it's not. You saw that in all our regressions, in all our models, we also control for robots because they're important interactions. Christina already mentioned it this morning, today, that there is a lot of AI in robots, and well, AI will make robots faster to train. So we also see a very strong positive correlation. So we have to be careful that we also take into account the earlier technological waves in order to tease out what's the additional effect of AI is. The second lesson is definitely that AI affects all skill levels. So this is not a replacement of some low-skilled people who don't know what to do, and the technology just automates their job. This is a technology very much in the spirit of the general purpose technologies that will shift work for all workers, or well, for many workers. In Germany, it looks like that automation seems to be quite a strong component of what's happening. There is some employment decline. The effect is small. It's actually stronger at the firm level. We have a companion paper. However, what is interesting is even though AI affects all workers, the negative implications in terms of wage effects, for example, are mostly concentrated among less skilled workers. And I think this has to do with the fact that low-skilled workers have less opportunity to switch to tasks where there is actually value and comparative advantage. So they are affected by automation, but don't have yet the skills or the capacity to go and switch their job to another task that is still highly valued or even increases in demand. And that's what, in some sense, saves the skilled workers, that they do have a comparative advantage they seem to be turning to in order to, even in some sense, in some cases, increase their wages. So for Germany, the picture, at least for now, seems to be that AI seems to be in quality increasing, not because one party is not affected, but because one party can actually move to other tasks that shields them from the negative wage effects of AI. And I think I will stop here a little bit ahead of time. Thanks a lot. There is a lot of work, I think, as Christina was mentioning. We're trying to work on that with firm-level data and also trying to get into firms, because I fully agree that this is really where we need to get the next step going to understand how the AI revolution will manifest in firms. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Christina, also for making my job easy. Actually, I guess, does research qualify as routine task in your definition, like what the two of us do?
Part of it.
All right. So, Antonio, while you get ready, just want to remind the online audience that we will collect your questions, and Antonio will help me to pick them up. So you have a bit of time now, but the system is open. So please, we welcome your questions. Antonio.
Thanks a lot. Okay, so thanks a lot, Christina. Thanks for inviting me to comment this paper, which I'll try to give briefly a kind of a slightly different perspective of why I think this is relevant, even though my motivation has been very well introduced in the previous talk, actually. But let me quickly give a bit of a background of, taken from another paper, of what we think the impact of AI will be on the labor market, and especially on different tasks on the labor market. So if we take this paper by Agrawal, Gans, and Goldfarb, what they say is that AI is mostly a technology which will enhance our the ability of machines to predict, right? It's more kind of a prediction tool. And in fact, what they expect, what we can expect AI to do is to, first of all, substitute capital for labor in prediction tasks, okay? So we will increase our forecasting ability for machines, so this will eventually substitute some labor in this respect. However, it will also have an impact on some kind of decision tasks, especially those tasks which need quicker, so where reaction time is important. If we think of self-driving car, for example, that's where they think this really matters. So this is still decision tasks, but quicker prediction will help in automating this kind of decision. And so my reading is that this kind of tasks is where they would expect to see more kind of substitution, if you want. Well, instead, of course, we can expect AI also to have some more kind of productivity, some enhancing productivity effect on, of course, on some type of decision tasks. For example, their example is about like surgeons, as we have seen in other papers as well. But I think somehow this kind of decision task is also can also fall into the monitoring task that Christina was talking about. And of course, then there's the possibility that AI will create new tasks that we cannot think of now, maybe, because they sufficiently reduce uncertainty, so we will start being able to take some other decision that we don't think we can take now. So this is just to say that, and maybe that's one of the first comment, is that maybe the division in tasks that we have used, especially for the past ways of technology, maybe that's not the one that we should look into when we want to somehow have an idea of where AI will, in fact, have an impact on the labor market. I mean, this is not to say that the analysis of the paper is not relevant. I think that's really good, especially because it allows to compare with robots. But I think if we want to also maybe incorporate in a model the tasks that we expect to be somehow automated, then maybe we can also start of thinking of in a different way of the tasks which we can expect to be affected by AI. And the reason why I think thinking of tasks and how tasks changes is also important, on top of just to know how labor market will evolve, is that, as we were saying before, there's been several efforts to try to understand the impact of AI given the distribution of tasks that we observe in the labor market. And so there's all of these. Actually, here I'm showing you some picture, and one is one from the paper I was presenting at the workshop, so that's what we did. So the picture, which is panel A here, is what we did. And so basically what these papers do, and what we do as well, is take the occupational distribution on the labor market, look at what people in different occupations do in terms of tasks, and then try to predict which occupation will be mostly affected by AI given the tasks that they currently do. But of course, if AI will change tasks that different occupations do, this analysis is at least not completely correct. I mean, I think it can still give some insights of what can happen, but still we should take into account that possibly tasks will change. And I think that's where Christina's paper is going to be very, very helpful, actually. Because like here, what we observe, so what I'm plotting in this graph is that this is exposure to AI by occupation divided by different earnings, labor income actually quintiles, and labor earnings deciles on the other picture in the work by Pizzinelli et al. And the idea here, if you look at this graph, it looks like high income jobs seems to be very much exposed to AI, also with potential of substitution. So then this would point to some type of potential redistribution in terms of, decrease income inequality. But of course, if high income jobs will start doing more, so if the current definition of occupations which fall in the high income job is wrong, because they are more able to change the task they're actually performing, then of course we would expect, we should reasonably expect less income redistribution, which is actually what Christina is pointing to in her paper. So this is just to give a kind of a different motivation for the paper and why I think this is particularly relevant, just because I was working on this kind of fixed task model before. So this paper, what they do, they answer different questions. The first question is whether AI changed the task content of occupation. And the answer is yes, in the direction that we can reasonably expect. So less abstract tasks, more monitoring tasks. The second question is this different between high and low skilled workers? Again, the answer is yes. So high skilled workers can more easily move to other abstract tasks, apparently. Third question, does AI adoption have consequences on wages? And the question again seems to be yes, so with the wages for low-skilled workers especially declining. And finally, do workers change job as a consequence of AI introduction? And again, it seems that within the same industry this is happening, okay? And this is different from previous technologies, most of these findings. So I have two main comments. I mean, some have partly been answered during the talk. I mean, the first one is, of course, a cheap one. So the patent data used to define AI are for the period 1990-2018, and the question is then which kind of AI technology is this period capturing? So in the paper, it's explained that this exposure is highest in manufacturing. This is not to say that AI exposure is now low in manufacturing, but it's likely that with these new tools, it will the exposure in service sectors is going to increase quite a lot, and probably and possibly this is not captured in at least in the current version of the paper. So Gen AI seems not to be in there, for example. And then, of course, we can think whether some results may change. So, for example, mobility across industry may be different in the service sector compared to the manufacturing. There may be less non-substitutable tasks in the service sector. And of course, again, now maybe we should start thinking of incorporating more, I don't know, Gen AI technologies, but there will be more in the future. So of course, I mean, that's not something we can predict. I mean, I guess for empirical work, we should base our result on what happened in the past. But of course, this is something we want to take into account, and maybe we can, knowing what's going on, so knowing which kind of sectors are more affected in the data, we can also speculate a bit of like what we can expect in the future. And so related to this, this was also partly touched by in the discussion, is how should we interpret the inclusion of AI and robots in the same equation? So at the beginning, I was not 100% sure I got it. I think this is not explained in the paper, but you touched upon it in your talk, and I think that's a good point. So, and it relates to the comment I was giving before. So of course, the first wave may be more related to robots and AI involved in robot functioning, but like, because you are controlling for robot exposure, this means that it may be that like, this control can allow you to say a bit more on the kind of AI technology that you are actually looking into. So we are trying to control for this more kind of automation and including more this other type of more somehow more related to prediction, and if you want to maybe also to moving towards this more Gen AI wave that we observe now. I had a question on potential interaction, then I think you have a table in the end which was not mentioned in the paper where you show there's no interaction. But of course, I mean, interaction is one issue between robots and AI, but then once you start controlling, I guess there's some parametric assumption in there that maybe can be worth investigating a bit. But I think in general that's, I mean, I can see now the reason why including robots within the same equation. I think it's good to have it as a discussion. Second comment is that the part on task changes and the part on labor market outcomes seems a bit disconnected, and I can understand why, because of course this depends on the data availability, of course. Somehow throughout the paper and also the discussion, it seems that the former, so the part on task, is somehow interpreted as a mediator to the latter, but like I'm just wondering whether this is obvious or not. So for example, there's this like a possibility. It can be that workers whose task does not change because of AI are more likely to change firm. But at the same time, it can be that workers who actually change firm do change task because they change firm. So it's not really clear, I think at least, how to relate this result on tasks to for example, the result on movement between firms. And also, I think if this is the case, then somehow this challenges a bit the view that changing task is good. It can be that workers are somehow forced to change task, and it's not clear whether maybe this changing task will also lead to lower wages, something we don't know. In the end, I was trying to point at some ways to possibly link more, but like I think you already do everything at the 3-digit occupation level. I was wondering whether you could exploit some difference between the changes in task at the 2-digit as compared to the 3-digit level, but I'm not sure that's necessarily a good idea. Last point is steps ahead, and like one thing again here is citing my paper again. Sorry for that, but it's just to say that like, I think this is an interesting point. Is of course thinking of other types of inequality, not only income inequality, and one of these which we generally think of a relevant one on the labor market is gender inequality. So the graph I'm showing here is again using this fixed task distribution within occupation, and what we observe, that's for the Italian labor market, but it's a relatively common result I think now, is that women are more likely to work in occupation whose task is more likely being affected by artificial intelligence. Now, if you think of this possibly related to service sector, for example. And it seems that women, I mean, other papers show that women are generally less likely to use AI these days. So I think whether, so looking also at how men and women change their tasks on the job, that's also something which I think would be really interesting. So it's just to say, like, I think this change in task is definitely something relevant within this literature. We know there are some kind of common patterns now. One is on income inequality, another is on gender inequality. It would be worth to exploit this research on changing tasks, also to investigate other types of inequalities. Yeah, I think then I have some minor comments, which I think I can just send you by email, and I would just stop here with my discussion. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Antonio. Excellent. So while you collect your thoughts, do you want to react to Antonio now, or?
Sure, I can. I mean, you know, on your point about do we capturing the right tasks? I mean, I partially agree. So we have a follow-up project where we actually look at the online job vacancy data, which cannot be more detailed, where you start with 60 million different skills, and then you try to narrow it down. And there we actually find for Europe that AI seems to be, at least the early patterns point everything different from Agrawal. So we see actually more demand for prediction, more demand for decision making, more demand for managing skills. Of course, there could be scale effects, most likely. So I think it is worth looking at a more richer picture, also because what Christina was saying, that the organization needs to change, and that will change what we need in order to make this work. And I think that definitely is true, but with that data, you will not get at that. You will get a very broad picture, which I think is nevertheless interesting. And maybe a quick comment on the service sector. It is true that patents are, because the patents are given for inventions that provide a technical solution. So it is true that there is some, I would say, tilting towards the manufacturing sector, which traditionally, for at least in Germany, is a very important one. It is, however, true, we have another paper on the firm level adjustment to AI. We see also negative employment effects in the service sector. So it's not that this is a manufacturing phenomena, this is very broadly spread. I think what our measure doesn't really capture is, as I said, the high, let's say, some of the professional services, so real estate, some of the insurance work, where I think our measure is weak. But I think it paints a broad and quite detailed picture, because we can look at this within occupation changes, literally. And maybe the last comment, your point is well taken about, well, how do we actually connect the task changes with the worker movements? The problem is that because most of the changes occur within detailed occupations, if you don't have detailed task data at the worker level in the admin data, which you will never have, it's really hard to characterize occupations by something and then hope you find some pattern, because that's exactly what you don't see. So it's not that across occupation changes in our context actually helps us. And that's why, we are somewhat limited. But yeah, there's more work on the go to kind of shed light on that. So, yeah.
Good. All right. So who wants to start? I have a question up front. If you could hand the mic.
Hi, yes. Christina McElhern, University of Toronto. Love this paper very much. I'm curious about the possibility, and I know data doesn't always tell us what we want, but to look at variation in changing. We can imagine that different types of changes would have different valences. They might be positive, they might be negative. Usually, taking a pay cut is not positive, but one of the things we saw when we were looking at reallocation of workers in the wake of software adoption was that older workers would leave and then not reattach. And so maybe getting into some of the worker characteristics and pulling apart if there's some changes that are positive and some that are not, and could we learn how to do more of the former and less of the latter, seems maybe helpful.
Yeah, point very well taken. So what I was very surprised is we don't seem to see an age gradient, in the sense that what you just mentioned, older workers are somehow less inclined to adapt to the new technologies, and they maybe they leave the industry. So initially my thought was, okay, the AI is around, the young people will enter and the old people will leave, and that will kind of change the. That's not what we see, which I thought was a bit curious, because that was my expectation. We also don't seem to see that the older workers seem to suffer, at least not, we can't detect it. Now, this could of course be related to quite secure jobs in the German labor market. You hardly, or in very few cases, you see that older workers suffer too much because they're shielded from getting displaced. They're very expensive to kind of let go. So yeah, so that might have something to do with that. But yeah, I mean, I think there are dimensions we haven't looked at. For sure, we could dig in more.
Next question. Okay, in the middle.
Yeah.
All right.
Hello, Esther. Is this switched on?
Yep.
Hello, Esther Baranyai from the Central Bank of Hungary. Thank you very much for the presentation. My question is related to, given the low level of AI adoption that you see in your sample, to what extent do you think that your conclusions regarding the difference in how AI impacts different skill-leveled workers holds for if AI adoption is more widespread? So what I'm in particular thinking about is, for example, now you see this movement into teaching. Now, is there only so much teaching that can happen, and these sort of early adopters are moving into those workers into teaching, but maybe we won't see that if AI is rolled out at a larger scale, or do you think this more or less holds? It's difficult to say, I guess.
Yeah, like Christina, I left my crystal ball at home. I think that's super difficult to tell. I mean, I think there are signs that, yes, we can creep up further the task complexity level with AI. But we're nowhere there yet. I mean, many firms are struggling with very simple things. So, it will take a lot of time. But yeah, I think it is definitely possible. However, we might also see new tasks emerging, and who has a comparative advantage there? Maybe it's again the high skilled, because they're more used to learn new things. So. Yeah, I'm not, I don't think I'm a super pessimist in the sense that, at some point we will just sit around and don't know what to do. I doubt that, but at this point it's really hard to tell.
Some would consider that an optimist, but at least Keynes has famously predicted that we should all be working less today 100 years ago. And it's been wrong for 100 years, but maybe it's going to be right soon. I guess the question is, are we still going to... I find it very interesting that the wage effects are rather small. So that's good, I guess. My main question is around who will... It's more the wealth distribution, right? Who will, in the end, own the new labor, the combination of AI and labor, as I sort of call it.
Yeah, I have nothing to say in this paper about this. Yeah, for sure. I mean, however, you know, if you go to the firm level, and now we talk about the worker level. If you go to the firm level, I mean, firms have a much harder time walking away from the industry. So for them, we actually see quite a lot of the effects that Christina, of the earlier adopters, we see these negative effects in employment, especially in the ICT sector, because there, of course, it's rampant. But we also see it in the knowledge intensive. There is a lot of action both in manufacturing and services. So the firms, well, in Germany, they also seem to have a rough time. So that, I think, fits the picture.
But it was striking to me that you find that these, as you call them, exposed industries, this is where the workers are leaving from, because at least, you know, at least the stock market thinks those are going to be the industries that are going to be growing and they're going to be very profitable. So do you have a sense where these workers are going and why those industries are not somehow managing to keep those workers? Or maybe this is more German specific, these are not growth industries, I don't know, but do you have a sense?
Yeah, I mean, I think as I mentioned before, we were very puzzled by that because, again, my sense was, okay, there's new technology arriving, some industries are picking it up, and then you would think lots of young people go in, maybe some others leave, and then in the end it's going to be a younger workforce, maybe more skilled workforce. That's not what we see. And I don't know, so we are currently working in Norway and France, and I want to kind of understand, is that a German pattern because of demographic shifts, because of some other peculiarity, or is that a more European phenomena? I don't have the answer yet, but we will find out soon, I hope. Norway is one of the very high users of AI. France is also quite well equipped, so I hope we will have some answers soon.
All right.
There's one more.
There's one more question here.
Okay.
Thank you, Elijah Lingorski, Bulgarian Central Bank. Compliments from me as well for the excellent work. Given the different demographic fundamentals, let's say in Europe, some parts of industrialized Asia, North America, do you see any potential fundamental difference in the way exposure to AI for jobs may work out here vis-a-vis the United States and North America, taking into account the demographic differences? And also, like rapid changes in technological attitudes at firm level and labor level, promoted by unexpected events like global pandemic, like we saw what happened with COVID and the way automation, e-commerce, and many other not necessarily AI related technologies changed quite substantially work habits and certain attitudes at both work and labor and firm level. Thank you.
Oof, so yeah, now I wish I had my crystal ball again. I mean, I think there are many dimensions that are different from North America to Europe. Legislation being, how we regulate AI. I mean, if you go to the internet and you have to give your cookie, yes, every time you go to a website. I mean, there is a much more critical and regulatory attitude in Europe, which I'm not sure is helping us in some aspects. It's maybe helping us in some aspects, but I think it's also harming us. I mean, in terms of the demographic shifts, I mean, AI can also be a big opportunity. I mean, we will have, in many countries, we will have fewer workers. Well, so we better automate some of the processes. So I think it all depends on how we shape this. I mean, I think I'm very much on page with Darren Acemoglu on that. How we define it, how do we make it to work in our specific societies, in our business world, in how we want to live. I think that's going to be crucial, but we shouldn't think about this, this is threatening, we need to tie it down, regulate it, forbid it. I think we need to be much more open, and that's where sometimes I wish we would have a little bit more of a North American attitude towards that.
But not in other domains.
That's For sure.
Okay, very good. I think it's time to close the session since we didn't ask you to bring the crystal ball. And I apologize for that. So I think this was great. And as usual, more questions for research. And I like very much this comparative approach you're taking. Often we are very much influenced by evidence from the US, and yes, Europe is different. So, time for the next paper. Liudmila, all yours.
All right. So hello, everyone. My name is Liudmila Alekseeva. I'm an assistant professor at Leuven University, and I'm very happy to present to you today our joint work with Professors José Azar, Mireia, Giné, and Samsa Samila from IESE Business School in Barcelona. The paper is AI adoption and the demand for managerial expertise. I think in this room, overall, we have a consensus that AI is an extremely powerful, promising technology that has a potential to disrupt industries, occupations, and also increase the overall productivity growth. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here. And a lot of case studies, for example, as the ones conducted by McKinsey in the recent survey, or also a lot of examples in the business literature, really tell us that companies are more and more adopting artificial intelligence in order to try to boost their productivity and innovation. What those case studies are also highlighting is that companies also undergo dramatic changes in the way how they restructure their workflows, how they manage their workforce, and how they re-engineer their business processes. However, how interesting is that beyond those case studies, there are quite little evidence on the large scale about what exactly is happening in organizations, how exactly they are restructuring in order to benefit from AI. And this is exactly where we want to contribute in the literature. So we want to ask, are managers still needed in the age of artificial intelligence, or actually AI algorithms can take effective managerial decisions and we don't need even to train managers in the business schools anymore? So our big research question that we're going to tackle in this project is, as firms adopt artificial intelligence, is there a change in the role of managers in organizations? And our motivation here is exactly what earlier our keynote speaker also highlighted, is that in order to get benefits from AI, companies need to reorganize. They need to build some complementary capabilities to AI. And managers, managerial practices, managerial role and tasks is where the largest impact can actually happen. I will not be summarizing in detail the empirical literature, but I just would like to highlight that we already have some areas on the or research on the aspects of different AI effects, which are quite rigorously studied. So we already know that there is evidence that AI is a potentially new general purpose technology. Then there is already evidence on how AI affects labor market. There is some evidence, though conflicting, on the effect of AI on firm productivity, growth, and innovation. And now recently, more and more, especially with generative AI, research looks into productivity of specific worker. But interestingly, there is very little research on the effect of AI on the firm transformation, especially in terms of managerial practices. And we have to wait for the new paper as well from Christina on this. The closest paper that we find in this area is the paper of Dixon and co-authors that analyze the effect of robots, including AI-powered robots, of course, on the demand of managers. So we're trying to really fill the research gap in this area. Why studying the effect of AI on managers is even important? So we think that it's important at least for two different reasons. So first, we can describe how firms evolve when they adopt artificial intelligence to try to understand what capabilities they actually need to be building in order to benefit from AI. AI is very different from prior technologies, so organizational capabilities are also likely to be very different from the ones we saw with the adoption of prior generation of technologies. And as well, analysis of this relationship can also help us understand some of the mechanisms behind those changes, meaning, for example, which skills are more complementary with AI and which skills are likely to be redundant in the future. I have to say that prior literature on the adoption of previous technologies, such as information and communication technologies, doesn't give us much guidance on predicting what will be the effect of AI on managers. We know from prior research that communication technologies actually increased the demand for managers, because the intuition was here that when such technologies as email are being introduced, then subordinates have easier access to their managers. It's easier and faster to get information that they need contacting their manager. So the subordinates do not need to have managerial knowledge. On the other hand, when firms introduce information technologies such as enterprise resource planning systems, their situation is reversed. There is a decrease in the demand for managers. Now that the employees on the ground can access information that previously was only available to managers, they don't need to contact the managers that often. And therefore, the demand for managerial involvement is decreasing. And similar effects are also found on the effect of robot introduction and also digital collaboration tools. So given this kind of contradictory evidence on the introduction of prior technologies, it also makes sense to investigate what will be the effect of AI in this area. So I already introduced you our large research question, but in order to tackle it into more detail, we're focusing on 3 more detailed questions. So first, we're just interested in whether companies replace managers or make them even more important, meaning increase the demand for managers. Then we also are interested what skills will managers need when working with AI. And finally, what are the employment and salary effects in companies adopting artificial intelligence? Just again, summarizing some of the predictions about the effect of AI on managers, it is conflicting. It's not clear. There are both potentially negative and positive influence of AI adoption on managers. So first of all, AI can definitely replace managers because it simplifies task delegation and the supervision of employees. Now, if the manager has a better view of the performance of employees, you need fewer managers to supervise the same number of employees in your company. At the same time, like in the paper analyzing the robots, if employees now do fewer mistakes as well, this simplifies significantly the supervision task of the manager, and you need fewer of them. As well, AI can automate a lot of tasks that managers do in their everyday job. Managers do a lot of admin work, and admin work is exactly where AI is doing a great job at automating tasks. But on the contrary, there is also predictions about increasing demand for managers when firms adopt AI. So first of all, AI introduces larger complexity in the organization. Now people need to work along with AI algorithms and tolerate their presence, let's say. So managers might need to refocus their free time into training people or communicating with them better in order to maintain morale, etc., etc. As well, AI might require additional supervision of the output of the algorithm that it is producing. So there is acceleration of the production of new products, for example, and managers might need to verify the output and the proposed products and mitigate the risks involved. As well, ethical supervision is definitely a managerial task that can become even more relevant. And finally, as I already mentioned before, there is also a need to restructure the processes within organizations. And this is where managers are experts. They see the broad picture in the organization and they know how to restructure the processes to implement AI better. So all those new tasks can be increasing the demand for managers. And this is what we actually find following those predictions. So we find that firms adopting artificial intelligence are actually demanding more managers, both in absolute number and also as a proportion of demand for other types of labor, which shows us that AI adoption actually is not replacing managers completely. It actually increases their intensity of the demand for managerial skill. From the qualitative perspective, we also find that companies are requiring a different profile of managers now that they adopt AI tools. So for example, managers need less of those tasks such as forecasting, planning, budgeting, They need less of some of the physical abilities. At the same time, companies adopting AI require more frequently from managers to have a higher communication and teamwork skills. So teamwork, collaboration, decision-making, creativity, data analysis. So it seems that the tasks of the managers are moving from admin tasks towards more complex decision-making. And finally, just looking at some broader implications of AI adoption at the firm level, we see that the salaries of managers are actually increasing with the adoption of artificial intelligence, but there is no increase in the inequality within the organization between managerial and non-managerial salaries. We see that non-managerial salaries are also growing. And we do not see the destruction of the jobs within organizations, especially in the later period of AI adoption. I'm going to show you now more details of how we conducted this analysis and how we got to those results. So first of all, we use, I think, a pretty famous data set used in the labor market research, provided by Lightcast, which is a data analytics company that provides us almost a universe of online job postings in the United States. And in the period which we are analyzing, between 2010 and 2022, we have almost 400 million vacancies. So as you can see, because our period also finishes at 2022, we're also not covering the period of generative AI. So here we're talking about the prior generations, such as diagnostic and predictive AI. The data that we have is not only very big data, it's also rich data because it provides us a lot of details about each specific vacancy. We know the job title, we know the employer that posted the vacancy, experience and education required from the job market candidate, occupational classification code, and also, most importantly for us, the detailed list of skills required in this vacancy. We do not use the whole data in our final analysis, so we're really focusing on this subsample of large firms that we're able to match with Compustat. We do it for several reasons. First of all, we want to get some additional operational and financial characteristics, and also we want to get rid of some of the non-profit and governmental agencies that are widely covered by the vacancies data, but we do not want to include them in our sample. And finally, I have to stress here that we also do not include here IT and professional services companies, because we want to see primarily what's happening in the firms that are adopting AI for their own use rather than developing AI and selling to outside firms. And in the end, we have around 2,300 unique firms over multiple years. Leveraging this large, very rich information on the skills provided in the vacancies, we're implementing this skill-based definition of AI. I'll explain what it is exactly in the details. We are leveraging here the insight that firms adopting AI need at least some AI skilled labor in order to implement and maintain and interpret the algorithms. So by tracking the demand for AI specialists in the companies, we're are able to track the AI adoption in those firms. More specifically, we're following here a data-based approach of finding those AI vacancies in our data. And this approach was explained very well in the recent paper of Babine and co-authors published last year. But I will very shortly also summarize what exactly we do. So in the first step, we are estimating how much each skill in our database is related to AI. And here it's very simple. We're just looking at how much is each skill co-occurs with some core unambiguous AI skills. In the next step, we simply calculate the average AI relatedness score at the vacancy level by averaging the scores at the skills level that are mentioned in the vacancy. And then, of course, we do some robustness checks. Let me show exactly what we do. So here, in case it's too small, I'm going to comment on that. First, this is the first step where we estimate how much each skill is related to AI. So, for example, sentiment classification, the top skill here has a score of 0.98, which means that 98% of times these skills appears in the vacancies together with some unambiguous AI-related skills. So this is a very much AI-related skill. At the same time, on the bottom, we have internal auditing, electrical engineering, sales goals, which almost never or very rarely appear together with AI skills. So we do not consider them as AI related. At the next step, here on the column, we have how many skills each vacancy is requiring. We're simply averaging those scores, and we're estimating this AI relatedness score at the vacancy level. So for example, machine learning engineer is our top example here, has a 95% relatedness score to AI, which is a definitely AI-related job. At the same time, jobs on the bottom, such as laboratory technician, e-commerce management, director of sales, are not very much AI-related jobs. Here, important to mention that we have to use some kind of cutoff in order to split vacancies between AI-related and non-AI related. And here we're again following the prior literature and using 10% cutoff. But we use a lot of robustness checks and also some more simple measures, and results are consistent. So after identifying those AI-related vacancies, we can now track the demand for the number of vacancies and also the share of AI vacancies within each firm. So here we have the example of Procter & Gamble, and we see that the number of vacancies starts growing around 2016. And this is exactly the period when most of the companies are increasing their demand for AI skills. This is a time when there were significant breakthroughs in AI technology, and also some of the tools became widely available that made companies, that made it easier to adopt AI in a lot of firms. On the bottom, AI share is a simple measure that we use as our main measure of the intensity of AI adoption in companies. It simply measures the proportion of AI vacancies in the firm. So the number of AI-related vacancies divided by the total number of firms' vacancies. And this is the graph that shows the average AI share with the red line and the number of AI vacancies in our data set. So we see a very fast increase in the demand for AI adoption, especially in this later period of AI adoption. In order to estimate our dependent variables, so demand for managers and the demand for managerial skills, we estimate also some measures based on the vacancies data. So the manager's share is also simply estimated as the number of vacancies in the managerial occupation in the firm divided by the total number of vacancies in the firm. And then the demand for various managerial skills is also simply estimates what is the proportion of managerial vacancies demanding the specific skill. And I'm going to show you which skills we are looking at. Just also the illustration of our average managerial, the number of managerial vacancies, but also the share of managerial vacancies. And we see that even though the absolute demand for managers is slowly growing in the data, the share is decreasing. So it's not that our AI share and manager share simply co-occurs in the data. It actually seems to be moving in the opposite directions. It's also probably a small table for you, but I will just comment that our average AI share in the data is quite low. So indeed, AI adoption measured at least in this way is quite low. It's 0.5%. And there is also a lot of heterogeneity in this. There are a lot of companies that have zero AI over many years, and then there are some companies that have quite a large proportion of vacancies demanding AI. The average managerial intensity is around 19%. So 19% of vacancies, typically, the firm posts is the managerial vacancies. And then in the next section, you can see the most popular managerial skills that we're going to look at. So the top 10 skills, here we can see the communication skills, budgeting, planning, teamwork and collaboration, and even Microsoft Excel and Microsoft Office still make it to the top 10 of the most popular managerial skills. In our analysis, we will be looking actually at the top 100 managerial skills. I'm not going to show you the results for all of them. We will be showing the most affected positively and negatively. The regression results, I will not stop for too long, but they are very simple. We're running our data is a panel data, so we can run the regressions with firm and year fixed effects. where our main independent variable is the AI share, which I already showed to you, and we include some controls for operational and financial characteristics of the firm. We're also trying to alleviate some of the identification concerns. Of course, adoption of artificial intelligence is endogenous. So here, basically, our primary concerns is that we're lacking some omitted variables, which might be affecting managerial intensity, and this effect on the managers is not coming through AI. And as well, we believe that AI share is simply a noisy measure of AI adoption. A lot of firms buy AI technology externally, and then they would be posting very few vacancies for AI specialists. So in a way, we need some external exposure for the firm in order to try to instrument our firm-level AI adoption. So here, the logic of this instrument is based on the insight of the geographically concentrated knowledge and innovation spillovers. So we assume that if a firm is located in the area where there are a lot of firms from the industry that are leaders in AI adoption, such as if the firm has a lot of IT companies around it, then it will be pushed to adopt AI to a larger extent as well. So more technically, let's say we estimate this instrument first using the industry shares in 2010, which is our pre-period. So we estimate what is the percentage of companies coming from various industries at the location of the firm. And then we multiply those shares with the industry-specific but countrywide AI adoption rates. So this is the expected AI adoption by firms surrounding the company. And I will be interpreting, showing you both OLS and IV regression results. So in columns 1 and 3, we can see the OLS regressions. So there is a positive correlation between the intensity of AI adoption and the demand for managerial vacancies, both in the absolute number, but also as the share of the total number of vacancies. And those results are consistent in terms of their sign and the statistical significance if we also use our instrumental variable. Interpreting the IV results, their economic magnitude of IV results, we can say that when the company increases its AI adoption by 1 percentage point, which is a lot, meaning that the company goes from almost zero AI to the top quintile of AI adoption, it would increase the demand for the number of managerial vacancies by around 8% and the managerial intensity by 1.4 percentage point or around 7%. So this is a sizable effect on the demand for managers. Running some heterogeneity analysis, we see that this is driven by manufacturing, the star of our discussion today. So the biggest changes in terms of the demand for the managers is coming in the manufacturing sector. And this is overall consistent with also a lot of discussion and business literature that still manufacturing has a lot of potential to increase its efficiency and the safety of its operations. So overall, the results are driven primarily by those firms. Now, from the profile of the managers, what kind of managers now companies need when they adopt AI? So on the top, we have the most positively affected skills. So now managers are more likely to be demanded to have teamwork and collaboration. Sorry, I cannot see. Creativity, different abilities to drive sales growth, data analysis, etc. So there is some focus on their complex decision making, on some strategic decisions such as driving the sales of the company. At the same time, on the bottom, we see that there is replacement of primarily planning related jobs, so some of the routine tasks. So scheduling, budgeting, Microsoft Office is actually decreasing in demand. So overall, there is a little bit less emphasis on some of the administrative and routine tasks. We also do it within the manufacturing sector as the most affected sector, and we see that overall the picture is similar. At the same time, we see some of the individual characteristics of the manager are also more likely to be required. We see that the listening, energetic, and self-starter are actually also among the skills required from the employees that are more frequently required in the vacancies. And on the bottom, again, we see that primarily the planning-related tasks are being replaced by AI. So this is potentially the area where AI is having the biggest effect on the managerial jobs in the manufacturing. Now, just to give a little bit of more broader firm level insights, we're looking at whether the salaries of managers are growing now that they're required to deliver more complex decisions, for example, whether those managers are valued more. And indeed, we find that the salary of the managers within the companies adopting AI is growing. However, it doesn't mean that there is increasing inequality in salaries. When we analyze the ratio between salaries of managers to non-managers, there is no significant change. It means that all vacancies or all jobs, as we proxy them, are becoming a little bit more valuable when firms adopt AI. Looking at the demand for overall labor in the companies, in our big sample covering all analyzed period, we see that there is actually some decrease in the demand for overall vacancies of the companies, and especially for vacancies of non-AI and non-managerial jobs. However, I cannot click here since I cannot click on the button. In the later period of the analysis, we see that all those significances disappear. So there is, in the later period, starting from 2016, which is a period of faster AI adoption and potentially adoption with more applications, there is no destruction of jobs in the companies. So very briefly to conclude, what does this all mean? So far, the narrative was primarily focused on the replacement of labor by AI. So with the application to managers, that would mean that AI algorithms can now take very effective managerial decisions, and therefore we don't need more managers. But this doesn't seem to be the case, according to our results. We see that when firms adopt AI, they also require more managerial expertise. Why is this happening? Well, this analysis of the skills that are more positively and negatively affected can give us some insight about what exactly is going on. So we see that indeed managers now have to do less of the administrative and planning tasks especially. So there is some automation going on, some negative effect that we were looking at. However, the increase in the demand for decision-making, creativity, teamwork, and collaboration hint into managing complexity and managing those new hybrid AI plus machine teams. So in a way, we find that there is evidence of both replacement and also changing the role of managers into managing more complexity. As well, we saw that there is more demand for sales-related skills. So in a way, also, this refocusing into driving the sales of the company, growth of the company, is also one of the potential mechanisms that is going on. So just summarizing then the results of the paper in one sentence, we can say that AI is not just a technological challenge for companies, it's also a managerial challenge. Because potentially for more effective AI adoption, we need more managers and managers with a specific managerial expertise of managing this increasing complexity of work. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks, Liudmila. Excellent presentation. As a manager, this was music to my ears. Less admin, and I can go ask for a pay raise, so that's good. Let's see if Juan agrees. He's a manager at the Bank of Spain, after all, so.
You wouldn't call me a manager.
Well, I do.
No. Okay. Good evening. Thank you to the organizers for inviting me to comment on this paper. And congratulations to the authors. I think it's a very, very nice paper where there is a very nice empirical exercise on how adoption of artificial intelligence affect the demand and the skill requirements for managers. As Luc said, it's also good news for managers and people wanting to be a manager. So it's very interesting. I have only 4 things to say. On the paper, as I said, the paper is well written, well documented, they do the right things, they use an impressive data set, and they treat the data the way that you think the data should be treated, and the econometric is fine. They use a state-of-the-art, both on the measurement of artificial intelligence and adoption of artificial intelligence, and on the econometric techniques. However, I have some concerns. The role of the discussant is to be skeptical about the paper. I am a bit skeptical about a few things. Okay? In particular, on the measure of artificial intelligence adoption, I think that we are calling artificial intelligence to too many things. I think my main takeaway from the sessions this afternoon is that artificial intelligence adoption is not about how many firms, it's not only about how many firms are using artificial intelligence, but also for what artificial intelligence is being used. And here we have many, many different instruments. I will show you just a few things. And then, since that we need to know much more about what is happening within firms with the use of this technology. On the implication for the skill distribution within firms and the required skill of occupations, well, they rely very much on business, economics, and management literature. I am an economist, and labor economist, and I want to see a more, a conceptual framework to understand what are the tasks that artificial intelligence could do, and what are the tasks that managers do, and how they complement or substitute each other. At the end of the day, the task-based framework is the name of the game in this literature. So, and here I have also some concern. And on the results of the paper, I think they are very interesting. There are still a few loose ends to take care of, and I will mention a few of them at the end. So, on the measurement of artificial intelligence adoption, as I said, we need to know which task is artificial intelligence performing within the firm. Okay? Artificial intelligence is basically a new source of knowledge. We see that for science and research, artificial intelligence is totally a game changer. For the production of goods and services, we need to know more what are the tasks that artificial intelligence is performing within firms, and how these tasks complement with the tasks performed by managers. Okay? The evidence that we have is basically from three sources: from surveys, from Banca data, and from investments on intellectual property data, complementary assets, and so on. From surveys, we could have a better feeling of what firms are doing. But surveys, well, are biased depending on the answer of the people being surveyed. Just let me take the opportunity to give you this result from a recent survey conducted by the Banco of Spain at the beginning of this year on a Spanish firm. Other central banks, like the Bundesbank and the Bank of Italy, have done similar surveys. And this confirms what we have seen throughout the afternoon. Adoption of what firms say that they are using artificial intelligence, the adoption is low, and not only low, but also most of the time is experimental and moderate. Intensive use of artificial intelligence is not, in European firms, is still very, very, very low. Okay. What they use instead, and I think is a good idea, is vacancy data. There are a few problems with this because flow is not the same as stocks, vacancies are not the same as hires, and they are very well aware of this, and they mention this. Still, I think it's a good source of information. What they see in their data is that the proportion of vacancies associated to artificial intelligence is very, very, very low, less than 1%, less than 0.5%. So still is a very early phenomenon. And the way they associated vacancy data to artificial intelligence is through job titles. And here, test analysis of the vacancy notice. Here, you have to be a bit careful because sometimes test analysis is dangerous, and identifying tasks from job titles is not always easy to do. Just let me give you an example. This is occupational classification in the US, computer programmers and software developers. Since 2003, when the US Employment Office started to follow software developers, there is a very increasing trend, and the number of computer programmers have decreased. To my mind, these two guys are the same thing, should be doing the same thing. So the point is, sometimes we are impressed by the job title, but maybe we are doing similar tasks. No? And then on the thing that we are calling artificial intelligence to too many things, well, the sample periods that they have is 2011 and 2022. And what what you have mostly is machine learning and deep learning. So the new developments in artificial intelligence that one would think that are more important for managerial positions, like generative artificial intelligence and so on, is not in the sample period. Okay, maybe that's the reason why that's why you need more context about what productive tasks artificial intelligence and managers do within the firm. And this is my second point. What do managers do? Good managers, okay? We know what bad managers do, but good managers, what do they do? As I said, probably here we need more context about how the organization of tasks within the firm is organized. And as I said, artificial intelligence is about knowledge and about generating and using knowledge. And probably the models by knowledge-based hierarchies, a la Garicano and Rossi Hansberg, are useful to understand what kind of knowledge and how managers use this knowledge. Okay? According to this literature, well, basically the allocation of tasks within the firm is that managers are there to solve problems, and and workers just do routine-based work. And the way that you organize all this is just not educating all the workers, but those in the production jobs learn the most routine tasks and only ask for direction whenever they need help on less routine tasks. Okay? Artificial intelligence has the potential to transform the way knowledge is managed and tasks, and the way tasks are distributed within firms, leading to more dynamic and adaptable organizational structure. This is the answer of Copilot when I asked it, in the context of knowledge-based models, knowledge-based hierarchy models, what artificial intelligence could do. Okay? Liudmila mentioned all this. This is what artificial intelligence could do: automatic knowledge management, dynamic task allocation, enhanced collaboration, decentralized decision-making, skill development and training, predictive analytics. It's not clear to me that all these ways of organizing knowledge within the firm lead to less managers. In particular, if you have more decentralized decision-making, you have workers that can solve problems with artificial intelligence, then you don't need the manager to tell you what to do. Okay, so probably the paper will be richer if you can address this in a context of some well-known structure model of managerial position. Finally, on the results of the paper, they merge vacancy data with CompuStat. In CompuStat, you have many variables about the firm. You have data on investments. So maybe you might want to contrast if your measurement of vacancy data is consistent with what you see in the firm in the use with investment, no? And with other variables. As for the covariates that you use in the regression, again, theoretical models should tell you which are because what you use is very sensible. You think that they are things that you should control for, but probably from this model you can learn more about what kind of covariates you can use. About identification strategy, well, instrumental variable, they do the state-of-the-art, this very popular instrument, Bartiv, shift-share, but they are not free from criticism. In particular, when you use this type of instrument, there are two issues that you need to take care of. To what extent you can assume that initial shares are exogenous. And here, the problem is that artificial intelligence doesn't come out of the sky just by accident. Would you look at a survey on how firms are adopting artificial intelligence, this paper by Calvino and Fontanelli at the OECD say that firms take advantage of their existing internal digital capabilities to adopt artificial intelligence. Okay, so they are building on previous impairments on digitalization. So to what extent you can assume that initial shares exogenous could be controversial. And also, if individual shares, initial shares are not exogenous, then you have to care about adjustment dynamics and probably do something else. On the heterogeneity by sector, the main effects are found in manufacturing, and you gave justification of why that might be the case. But if artificial intelligence is about knowledge and about how knowledge is shared within the firm, then it's not clear why manufacturing has competitive advantages on this. No? So maybe we need to know more about workers, first complementarities, and to explain better what is the sort of heterogeneity by sector. And about wages, well, to me, this is a puzzle. We have seen some effect, small effects on wage level, but not on relative wages. So still, we are not seeing implication for wage inequality. Probably this has to do with the fact that the wage structure takes some time to adjust, or probably it has to do with the fact that we are not measuring relative wages at the granular, as a sufficient granular level to look at where the effects are coming. So I just conclude. Will we need more managers because of artificial intelligence? Well, I don't know. I feel better working without managers. will artificial intelligence get more expert managers? Will artificial intelligence convert bad managers into good managers? Definitely not. And finally, some people still consider the possibility of singularity, where artificial intelligence is capable of doing everything. So maybe the managers of the future are from artificial intelligence, some kind of artificial intelligence. And that's it. Thank you.
Thanks, Juan. I guess the conclusion is there are only bad managers. Liudmila, you want to take a moment to respond?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much. So you started very inspiring me that the paper is great, and then you destroyed the paper, which is. But I'm very grateful for that. As always, I mean, you have to hear all this in order to improve. I will not, let's say, battle most of the comments because I think they're absolutely valid and there is still a lot of work to do. The only maybe correction I will do is that we're tracking AI using the skills rather than job titles, but we're tracking managers using the job titles primarily. So in this sense, if everyone now is relabeled as a manager, potentially we are picking up something related to relabeling. So this we'll try to also address. Framework, of course, totally well taken, and Bartek also. So yes, I think everything else I'm totally agree with.
You do what you can do, right?
Yes.
So, all right. Questions, comments? And maybe just for the fun of it, self-identify if you're a manager or not, or asking the question. So please, here up front.
I was actually just self-identifying as a manager. I wasn't trying to ask a question, honestly, but so sorry about this. But what is very interesting that the assumption that there will be more managers, because myself as a manager, it seems like you definitely have to reschool. Everything has to be replanned, and also considering the previous talk, what we're really thinking about right now is reorganizing everything. Like it really does not make sense to organize a company from an operations perspective how it was done 2 years ago, or it's still being done now. And as a startup founder, I'm here for Mireia Systems. We're planning all this right now, and it's amazing, it's great, but it's also a lot of stress actually, because you want to stay competitive, and tons of other startups to compete with. And there's this new term, or it's not that new, but in our sphere, this AI native founder. Yeah, what you have to do to stay competitive, and with the capital that you are raising, how much should be poured into setting up agents and stuff like that. So lots to think about, but not a question on my side. So sorry about that.
All right, then we switch over to this side. Front again.
Christina McElhern, AI busybody from Toronto. I'm wondering a bit about, this is a bit technical, but if you could run a placebo test where AI is trending and changing, but some of these other terms are also trending and changing, like stakeholders. So as a strategy professor, talking about stakeholders has changed a lot over time. At the risk of triggering people, words related to DEI are changing over time. Words related to the environment and climate and sustainability are changing. And you might be able to use that to run a test to see how much of this is just trends and how much of it is really AI specific.
Absolutely. I think there are a few things that we're planning to do about it. So let's say for the moment, it shouldn't be such a huge concern, let's say, because there is, let's say, year fixed effects, right? So we're controlling for some overall trend, but of course there can be different trends within different sectors, for example. So this we still didn't do, and we have to check. Yes, thank you.
Good. The There's a question here in the middle.
Thank you for interesting insight. I'm Ivan Mikhailov, Capgemini Managed Services for ECB. For me, as the one who definitely belongs to managerial cohort, it's interesting to see which future awaits us. But my question is related to more generic topic of AI-influenced decision-making. It's quite obvious that AI will be used more and more in decision-making, and it's also quite obvious it can be misused. What is the opinion in the research community? How should we tackle this problem? How can we, if not protect, but at least control this process of defending us from malicious AI agents influencing our decisions? Isn't it too early to think about it? We just started adopting AI. Should we think about adopting anti-AI? Or it's currently complete science fiction? Yeah, and so on.
I think this is a question for the whole panel to reply. I will start in case someone else wants to add. So I think there is no, let's say, empirical evidence on like what to do. We still don't know how it's done in practice, for example, on a large scale, only from some case studies. There is a lot of normative literature at the same time. So there are some recommendations about how you tackle it, and for example, using managers or reallocating the time of managers on verifying the outputs of the algorithm is one of the solutions. Other, especially the technical solutions, I'm less aware of, whether there is already some propositions about that. So yes, this is still, I think, something that I haven't seen much in the research, but definitely we need to look at.
Others want to weigh in on this?
Yeah, well,
Christina, and then Juan.
No.
Christina first.
Well,
Okay.
I mean, I can add a little bit of my anecdotal evidence. So, I mean, this is something public agencies worry a lot. So, you know, if you talk to, let's say, employment agencies, that's a main worry that, you know, they're doing something with AI, it somehow slips out. People get, oh, they're using AI to, you know, recommend me a job, recommend me a training. And somehow people take it badly because, well, God knows what the recommendation is. So, I mean, politically, they're very afraid of this. So I think we already see some also awareness. But yeah, again, there's the trade-off. Well, you also have to try out things in order to make it happen. So yeah, getting the balance between, let's say, experimenting maybe in some kind of shielded space and putting it to work in public, I think that's going to be the key.
Yeah, I think that for decision making, it matters a lot the type of decision you are taking and the social value of the job and what you are doing. Let me give you 2 examples. Medical doctors. You want the diagnosis to be certified by a doctor. But we know already that artificial intelligence are much more efficient than doctors at diagnosing some illness, okay? So there is a contradiction there because you want the doctor to say that what is the problem with you, but the doctor is going to be in a very bad position when they contradict what the artificial intelligence is telling them to do, okay? Human resources, selection of people, something similar. You have an artificial intelligence instrument, and the artificial intelligence select the best candidate. If you truly believe in that instrument, you should select that candidate. But at the end, you might have some bias and go against artificial intelligence because maybe you have better information or whatever. So at the end of the day, it depends a lot on the type of decision that you are taking and what are your job responsibilities.
My 5 cents on this is that, I mean, this is not my words, it's Professor Holton, who is one of the founding fathers, that you want to have some managerial discretion to switch off the AI, right? So when you start programming it, before you do that, actually, you want to think about that. You should be able to. And in the end, I think this is the ultimate thing that's going to be in the future left for managers. When to switch it on, when to switch it off. And then, okay, Christina, you have a question? Or, okay, then we have here. Yeah, that's fine.
A very brief one, taking a little step back. Christina, you also mentioned that you've been following Debano Cemolu's work with confidence on related subjects. So he's been looking at automation primarily as deflationary. Another crystal ball question maybe to the whole panel, or certainly to the whole panel. Do you see the impact on labor and generally the deployment of AI as more inflationary or more deflationary in the longer term?
Well, I think this is a question for the session tomorrow on monetary policy. So my sense is that in principle there should be no impact on inflation. Okay, what you are going to have is a change probably in the relative demand of different workers and so on. The production, to the extent that these workers earn the same wage, is going to cost you the same. So at the end, the impact on prices, beyond the cost of artificial intelligence, I don't think it's going to be great. But again, I think that will depend very much on monetary policy, and what tomorrow some people will tell us about how monetary policy is adapting to this.
So normally I hide behind it's the blackout period and we don't comment. But on this one I can easily comment by saying it will have zero implication for tomorrow's decision. I mean, it's such a slow-moving structural force that even if you're with Daron and you believe this will affect the price level at some point in studies future states, it will have no bearing over the type of inflationary pressures we care about in the short run. So at least it's not going to cross the mind of the policymakers tomorrow. So I think we have maybe one more question, Christina, if you want.
Well, maybe I don't know. I mean, I think I'm not an expert on inflation or deflation, but I think there are many things which we don't see today that might become relevant tomorrow. So, and just give you one example. I mean, now everybody is excited about these large language models, and we think, great, you know, they learn on all this big data, and you can automate so many things because you have these large language models. Well, are we sure that the training data these models train on will be as good as they are today because they're human created? And we already see that. I think that models that train on AI-generated knowledge, they deteriorate in quality. So, I mean, I think there are questions about keeping up the quality of where these models can train. That will be a major force in some years, and that might bring actually the worker back in, because you need to pay people to provide decent information that you can actually give that AI to make sure that they're not going wild. So I think there will be some of these changes, and so I don't buy into, we just, you know, these models can do a lot, and that's why there are certain changes we will observe. There will be so many counteracting forces that, yeah, we will have to see. But I agree, tomorrow, for sure, it will not have an impact yet.
Good, okay, that brings us to the end of a very interesting session. Thanks, Liudmila, for also, you didn't emphasize it, but there was some positive effect on research. I like that.